It's new project time. A month or so ago, I was looking at a dress that I wanted to buy online, a linen dress, and I looked at their sizing and I just didn't trust it. I kind of fall between a couple different sizes depending on what type of garment I'm looking for. And this one, like, according to their sizing, I should have been a size that I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not gonna fit, it's gonna be too big. And I've ordered from other places before, ordered the same size, and it was too big. I ended up having to take it in. So, long story short, I was like, do I really want to spend $200 US, which would be like more in Canadian, on a dress that I'm going to have to alter and probably like ruin the shape of? Or do I want to just make my own? And I always just want to make my own things because of who I am as a person. So basically, that's what I'm going to be doing with these fabrics here. So I have bought 3 different linens. This like raspberry burgundy color one, this green, like, I don't know, just green. I don't know the different kinds of green. Grass? It looks a little bit like grass. Sure. Emerald green? Maybe. And a bright, like, icy blue color. I don't remember how much of each I have, but I think I got quite a bit. I want to say like 3 meters of the blue, and then maybe 4 meters and 4 meters, but could have been 5 meters for one of these. Honestly, I don't remember. If I find the list, I will update you. Yeah, dress wearing has been where it's at lately. So I kind of have the ideas sketched out in my head for how I want the blue and green ones to look. The burgundy one I'm less certain of, so I will probably be doing that last. So for the blue, I'm planning to make a pinafore, kind of like a V-neck front. It's going to have a button front closure, princess seams, and then a paneled skirt where the panels will match where the princess seams are. It's going to be a half circle skirt and it's going to be sleeveless. For the green dress, this shouldn't be so funny to me. I wrote Peter Pan collar and then, green Peter Pan. I think I haven't been getting enough sleep. But, okay, for the green dress, it's going to have a Peter Pan collar, again, a button front, because I've had issues with zippers lately, so I'm just putting buttons in everything. Like, I don't trust zippers. We go on buttons. They're tried and true. They don't fail me. So, button front closure again. Puffed sleeves, like half-length sleeves. Front darts instead of the princess seams. I think I want to do some tiny pin tucks along the front as well. Just like 3 or 4 on each side. And a full circle skirt. We're going swirly with this one. And finally, for the burgundy dress, again, this one isn't totally fleshed out. But the things that I do know, I'm pretty sure I said it with so much conviction and then 0 conviction immediately after. So the plan is a lace collar, princess seams again, but maybe darts. See, I don't know why I'm so unsure. Like, I can't picture this one in my head like I can the others. It's very strange. I drew that one out like 4 different ways. Anyway, button front though, we're certain about the button front because buttons don't fail you. Puff sleeves, and then some of the things I'm unsure about is if I want it to have belt loops, if I want the skirt to be pleated, or if I want it to be a full circle skirt again, or even a half circle skirt. I saw online of a way to kind of pre-treat your linen, so it's harder to make it wrinkle in the future. So I'm going to try that out. Unfortunately, that means I have to iron all of this on my way too small ironing board. I should just get a new ironing board. But anyway, that's what we're gonna do first, is just pre-treat all of this. Oh gosh, how much did I say? Probably like 12 meters of fabric. Let's do it. Okay, yeah, I found the Pinterest thing that I had saved about pre-shrinking your linen and whatever, and trying to prevent wrinkles. And the first step is, before washing, dry iron the linen on the highest setting possible, and this sets the anti-wrinkle finish that comes on new fabric. So For me, that is 3, and this iron's nice because it shows you like, this is the steam, don't use the steam. So, you know, that was kind. So I'm just waiting for that to heat up, and then second step is to wash the fabric in the hottest water, dry in high heat until almost dry, and then press again. So drying it until it's almost dry is probably going to be pretty hard, nearly impossible, but we'll do our very best. During this first stage, I wasn't as concerned with getting all of the wrinkles out of the fabric, but more with setting any supposed anti-wrinkle finish into the fabric. I fumbled through ironing the first fabric a little bit, which was the blue one, but by the second and third, I had learned that leaving the fabric rolled up the way it had come and ironing each new segment as I unwrapped it was the best way to do it. That took so long, like an hour, maybe more, I don't know. That took so long, but it's done. The ironing is done, so I'm going to just double check from the site that I ordered these fabrics from that they can go in like hot water. I'm just going to make sure kind of their like fiber content and whatever, because I don't want them to shrink, or I don't want them to shrink too much, and then iron it all again. And then while they're in the wash, I'm going to work on the pattern for the blue pinafore dress. So let's do all that stuff. Okay, I've got my base pattern laid out here. Basically, if I have a pattern or if I want to make something that has princess seams, I use this pattern. It's for an Arya Stark like season 7 jacket. So it's really weird that I use it so consistently, but like I know it fits, I have it, and like it's got princess seams, so I'm gonna use it. You've got your side front, center back, and side back. It should all be fine. I'll probably end up like taking some of the shoulder width out, and what I'm gonna do is alter the front pattern so that it is like a V-neck, but that's it. So like I might as well just use this and alter it instead of making a whole new pattern. I think I have a mock-up of this somewhere that I keep around for because I use it all the time, and then if I need to change a piece of the pattern, it's easier to just use that pre-made mock-up. So I think I'm going to dig that out, and I should be able to just kind of alter the front piece, and yeah, it should be pretty quick and easy to do. Using my previously made mock-up, I folded and marked the shapes I wanted the new pieces to be. Once I was happy with the pattern, I ironed all the fabric again, this time using a spray bottle and a higher heat setting while ironing to really remove all the wrinkles. I don't think I managed to pull the fabric out of the wash while it was still damp, but I always spray it with water as I go, and this seemed to work well. Once the fabric was ironed, I cut out my bodice pieces, making sure I had enough of each piece for the front layer as well as the lining layer. I added some extra fabric at the front and back V's for seam allowance and buttons that I hadn't added to the pattern pieces. So I have cut out 2 layers. Wait, I've cut out enough to make 2 layers of a bodice. Yeah. They are all sewn together, like each layer is sewn together separately, and I have ironed the seams open and pinned everything around the edges. So I was either going to have to hand sew the armhole or hand sew the sleeves together, and I think what I'm going to do is hand sew the straps, sleeves, whatever, together rather than sew the armhole. So I'm going to sew up the front here around the arm and then leave a gap where the straps will meet. Sew up the back V, ditto on the other side. So yeah, I'm gonna do that now. With the pieces sewn together, I clipped the corners and the curves and turned it right side out so I could iron it all flat. I could have understitched the seam allowance to the lining layer to prevent the layers from shifting and the lining from peeking out, but they're the same color and I'm lazy, so I wasn't that concerned with it. I accidentally finished like the rest of the dress without talking about anything, because I just was in the zone. So I can't even remember. The last time I think I just was like finishing the bodice. So I cut out the skirt pieces. So we've got a half circle skirt. And then I did the pockets. They're done. I didn't have enough of the blue, so the front is lined with white. But like when you reach your hand in, you really only see the back portion. So that was at least what the thought process was. I sewed a little strip here for the buttons to be sewn to. So, or no, the holes. No, the buttons. And then I did all the buttonholes. So, whoops. But, you know, the rest of them I'll be better in the rest of them. So the only thing I have left to do right now is hem this bad boy. I've already, like, evened out the hem. It hung up overnight, so the skirt could stretch if it had to. So yeah, I'm just gonna hem it now. Sorry about that one. I'm working on making a pattern for the green dress bodice. So basically what I have is I kind of hodgepodged together the front of this bodice piece, and then I added a little bit extra for seam allowance and for the pleats. I have no idea how much fabric the pleats need, so I probably went overboard, but that'll be something that we figure out in the mock-up. And then I also kind of altered a pattern I had drafted previously that is just an entire one-piece bodice front with a dart. So this one didn't have seam allowance on it, so I've added it to this. So I'm just gonna make a mock-up, I think, and see how that goes. So I think this mock-up is pretty much done. So the 3 pleats are pleated. I'm great at this. So a couple of changes that I think I'm gonna have to make. The arm side might not be big enough, so I'm going to lay another pattern over and see if it kind of matches up. And then on my paper pattern, I'm going to need to extend this about 1/2 inch perhaps. And when I was cutting this out, I added a bunch here, so I'm going to have to add some to the paper pattern as well, so that there's enough room for seam allowance. Okay, I've been fussing with the pattern a little bit more, and I think we're very close. So I have moved the pleats in a little bit more, so you can see the lines where they were initially. So basically what I did is I sewed up the center front, and 2 inches from there the pleats are going to start. It looks a lot better than them being where they were before. Unfortunately, so this is the good side of the pattern for the pleats, but then this is the good side of the pattern for the armhole, so that was kind of dumb, but I can mash it together. The only thing now is that the collar is a little bit low, so I might have to just... Mitch!
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So the only thing now is that the collar is a little bit low, and I think I'd like it to be a little bit higher so that, like, I feel like a Peter Pan collar won't work if it's kind of a lower neckline. So I might have to raise this up a little bit and then make one more mock-up. But that way I can clean it up so I don't have all these lines everywhere. So that is the plan. I asked on my Instagram story if I should do a Peter Pan collar or a square neckline, and Instagram voted for square, and I was kind of leaning that way as well. So thank you, Instagram, for confirming my thoughts. So what I've done is unpicked all of my pleats and the dart, and I'm going to put this back down over the pattern and actually make like a full real mock-up just to make sure the pattern is, and then we can finally cut out the real fabric. Welcome to my front room with this paneled mirror that likes to cut my face up. There we go. Oh, that's a shot. We're in here because my boyfriend is streaming, so unless you really love to hear about Hades in the background of sewing videos, like maybe that's your thing. It's pretty niche, but I'm not here to judge. Basically, so I have finished fussing with this mock-up. So the armhole right now doesn't have any seam allowance, so I could see like where it would sit once it was sewn to the sleeve. And I had to kind of adjust the shoulder seam just a little bit. It's still doing like a little bit of a thing. Wait, can I zoom? Yeah. It's still doing like a little bit of a so I think I just don't care because I don't really know how to fix that. So I think I'm just going to leave it. So there is still seam allowance at the neckline. So when it is sewn to the other bodice layer, you know, it'll be a little bit lower, a little bit thinner straps. I'm not sure if this is too high of a neckline, but I am just going to leave it and then fuss with it once it's sewn to the other one because I think that's safer. I don't want to cut it too low right now. But yeah, I think we are good to get started on the actual fabric. What? Once again, I cut out enough pieces to make 2 layers of the bodice, one for the front and one for the lining. For the bodice lining this time though, you don't have to cut out any extra width for the pin tucks. I noted this on my pattern by using the mock-up with the pleats already sewn to mark where to cut for the lining layer. I just folded this bit under to cut out that piece. This clip is great because you can clearly see me lining up a piece that's supposed to be cut on the fold with the wrong side on the fold. Yay! I ended up using that piece for pockets later, so it wasn't a total waste, just a minor one. I cut out 2 sleeve pieces that I drafted previously for my wrap dress, adding a little bit of extra seam allowance at the top and bottom. Because I was trying to salvage the ruined bodice piece and use it for pockets, I ended up having to shorten my pocket pattern, but this turned out to be a good mistake as the pockets had been a bit too deep using this pattern before. I then laid out the rest of my fabric on the floor so my cats could use it as a bed and a toy. Wait, that's not right. It's so I could cut out the skirt pieces. Using a half circle skirt pattern, I cut out 1/2 of the pattern for the back of the skirt and 1/4 each for the front pieces, adding a little extra at the sides for seam allowances and a little bit extra on top of that at the front for buttons. With all the pieces cut out, I could get to assembling them. This dress took a little bit more work with the pin tucks, darts, and puff sleeves. I started with the pin tucks by drawing the lines in chalk. I drew 2 lines 1/2 inch apart that would be brought together to form the tuck, and another line 1/2 inch away for the gap between the tucks. I ended up sewing 3 tucks in total on each side of the bodice. Once they were sewn, I ironed them all so they were facing outwards from the center front. With the pin tucks finished, I then moved on to sewing the darts. I like to tie the thread tails together at the tip to keep the darts secure. This whole thing right now with like this beige skirt underneath and the puffy white sleeves, I feel like in The Sound of Music when Maria makes all the kids' clothes from the curtains, like I feel like that right now, and it's something else. Last up in the prep phase were the sleeves. I first started by French seaming them closed so there wouldn't be raw edges in the final piece. Then, using a long stitch length, I sewed along the top of the sleeve head most of the way so the sleeves could be gathered down to the length of the armhole. I usually start pinning from the underarm seam and start the gathers around 3 inches from the shoulder seams. What I love about puff sleeves, other than them being really cute, is that you don't have to worry too much about drafting a perfect sleeve pattern because you can just gather it down to the right size. These are sleeves you don't have to fear. I repeated the process of gathering down the bottom of the sleeve to fit into the cuff, which was just a long strip of fabric that fit comfortably but not too snugly around my arm. The cuffs and bodice lining were folded over their respective raw edges and hand-stitched with tiny slip stitches. With this, the bodice was mostly finished, so on to the skirt! All 3 of these dresses were sewn with French seamed skirts. I'll show you a more detailed explanation for the final dress, but basically the pockets are French seamed to the skirt pieces first, and then the skirt pieces are French seamed together as well. Okay, let's keep this momentum going. I have one more dress to finish, and I have changed the design a little bit. So instead of doing the Peter Pan collar, I'm again abandoning that. I don't know why I have such a commitment issue with the Peter Pan collar, but I'm not going to use it. So I'm instead going to do kind of like a swoopy, can you see this? Can you see this? Can you see this? I'm going to do like a bloop kind of collar. Does that make any, no, it doesn't make any sense. You'll see eventually. And then the sleeves are still gonna be puffy, but I'm gonna gather them and have a little ruffle at the bottom instead of the cuff. So this one should be faster this time, so let's do it. So I think this pattern is finally ready to go. I started with the original just center front bodice piece, and then I don't know if you can tell, but it is pieced together of like so many pieces of wrapping paper, as I was like, oh, I don't like this shape, let's add some more. No, I don't like that shape, let's cut it away. Wait, I like the first shape, let's add some more. So, I mean, it's not super pretty. I might actually trace it onto a new piece, but I might not because I'm lazy and like this works. But I made a mock-up and it fits pretty well, so I think I'm ready to cut out the fabric pieces. When cutting out the fabric pieces this time, I made sure to start with a long rectangular piece that I'd used to reinforce the buttonholes. I added these to the other two skirts as well, but had to scrounge together a piece that was big enough for both of them, so starting with this piece this time really saved me a lot of grief. Once again, I cut out enough pieces to make 2 layers of the bodice. The center back piece had to be modified slightly to account for the thinner shoulder piece of the center front. I also extended the bodice about an inch as I'm pretty long-waisted and the other bodices were a little short. Okay, I have all of the pieces cut out. So the first thing I cut out was this rectangular strip because I like to use it to reinforce where the buttons will go, and I keep forgetting to cut it out, so I'm like, I'm gonna do that first. Brilliant! And then I have 4 pieces of each bodice, except 2 for the center back because it's cut out on the fold. So that'll make 2 layers of the bodice, and then we have the skirt pieces and the pocket pieces and the sleeves, and I think that should be it. I have just like a handful of scraps left, so 4 meters was just enough, and now I can sew this bitch. The bodice pieces were sewn together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Before pressing the seams open with the iron, I first pressed them with my fingers, which was actually really helpful and made it easier to press them open with the iron later. Then the bodice pieces were laid on top of each other, right sides together, and sewn together at the front and neck seams. After sewing, I lined up the front shoulder with the back shoulder and sewed those together, lining up the seams with each other first and pinning outward from there. Then I flipped the bodice right sides out and ironed the seams flat. At this point, all the seams should be closed except for the arm side and the bottom edge. So the bodice is now sewn together, the base part, and I really have nothing to report other than it's cute. I'm happy. That's my whole thought. I'm really pleased with how the shape is looking, because like I said, this took like 4 mock-ups to get. I was like, the strap was too wide and then this was too low and it was too like, I don't know, angular, but I really like how it's looking now. So sleeves. For these sleeves, I wanted to do everything I possibly could with the pieces still flat because they'd be scrunched up with elastic eventually, and it's much easier to work on them when they're still flat, so I started with the hem, just folding up the bottom twice, then sewing. Then I marked a line where I wanted the gather and subsequently the ruffle to start. It looks like I went with 2 inches from the hem. I marked this using a heat erasable pen, which, as the name suggests, you can erase with heat. My elastic actually wasn't stretchy enough to cover the full width of the sleeve, so first I gathered it down a little bit at the line I'd previously marked, and then I sewed the elastic down with a zigzag stitch, stretching as I sewed. I then closed the sleeves with French seams, gathered them down to fit in the arm side, and sewed them in, again using a tiny slip stitch to sew the lining layer over the raw edges of the sleeve. It's time for one last skirt. The first step was to pin and sew the pockets to the skirt pieces with wrong sides facing each other, then trim the seam allowance to about 5 millimeters. Then the pockets are flipped around so right sides are together and sewn again, making sure to use a slightly larger seam allowance in order to encase the first seam within the second. Then the French seams are ironed towards the pocket bag. With all the pocket pieces attached, the skirt pieces are laid on top of each other and the seam steps are repeated. First, the pieces are sewn together around the pocket and down the side seam of the skirt. Then the seam allowances are again trimmed to 5 millimeters. The pieces are flipped right sides out and pressed, and the seams are sewn again, encasing the first seam within the second. The last step is sewing the pocket opening closed, making sure to backstitch at the openings to make sure the pockets don't tear open. With the skirt complete, I sewed on that long button reinforcement strip to one side with wrong side to wrong side, then flipped it over, tucking in the seam allowance and top stitching to secure it. Then the bodice and skirt pieces could be pinned and sewn together, and all the lining seam finishings could be completed with tiny little slip stitches. So I have finished slip stitching down the lining layer, and I just want to put a message out into the universe. This is mostly a message to myself in the past, but maybe if you're getting started on your sewing journey and you're like me, maybe this will be beneficial for you as well. It totally is worth it to take your time and make things that are pretty and sturdy, and maybe it'll take you a little bit longer to do it that way, but it's totally worth the effort to make things that you love. I used to make things and I would just do it as quickly as possible because you just want the thing to be done, but honestly, now that I've been sewing more and practicing, I can finish. Like, this is the second day I've been working on this, and the only thing I have left to do is the buttonholes and the buttons and the hem. So this will be done today. So 2 days to make a whole dress that's like pretty and looks nice on the inside, and you can be proud of it, and the seams will stand up in the washing machine. Yeah, totally worth it. Totally worth the time it takes to just make it well made. Okay, that totally wasn't meant to be a brag, like, look how good I am at hand sewing. Basically, my point is that taking the time to make things look nice from the inside is worth it, because not only will your garments look pretty, but they'll last longer and be stronger. I also don't have anything against top stitching instead of hand sewing. I just didn't have much thread that actually matched this fabric, and I wanted to save what little I had for the buttonholes. After hemming the dress and sewing the buttonholes, I packed up my sewing supplies and my cat, and we finished sewing on the buttons in the presence of sunshine and audiobooks. Finally, all 3 of these dresses were now complete. This was quite the endeavor, but they have quickly become a staple in my wardrobe, and you'd actually be hard-pressed to find me wearing anything else these days. They're super comfy, and I love the way the linen moves when you walk in them. The designs changed a lot through the process, but I'm still so happy with the final results. Well, there we go. That's everything. Thank you so much for watching. Just a couple of wrap-up thoughts here. I've never owned a linen dress before, and it is so fantastic. It's heavy enough that if it's windy, your skirt doesn't fly up, but light enough that you can wear it in the summer and not die. Once I finished the blue one, it was still a little chilly out, so I wore it with tights a few times, and it doesn't stick to the tights, which is fantastic because I have a cotton skirt that just sticks like crazy to the tights, and it's so annoying because it ends up bunching up between your legs and you have to awkwardly adjust it all day. Also, these dresses can be thrown in the wash and the dryer, and I didn't even iron this. I mean, you saw the pre-ironing process. So I pulled it out of the dryer when it was still a little bit damp, and then just hung them on hangers, and I mean, they could be less wrinkly, but I probably won't ever iron them if this is the worst it can get, so that's ideal. So in summary, linen dresses.